Hello and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict. In this report, I try to cover the various events that have occurred in the past week in both the Global Conflict 1 and the Global Conflict 2 in Stronghold Kingdoms. Now, we're going to start off with Global Conflict 1, and I had at least one person in the comments question as to where the Global Conflict 1 report had gone. Well, it's really quite simple. This is the Global Conflict 1 report as well as the Global Conflict 2 report. I merged them simply because I couldn't maintain the current rate at which I was producing content for Global Conflict 1 and then apply that to Global Conflict 2 as well. So, as of today, Global Conflict 1, we are in day 214. If we take a look at the leaderboard, quite disappointingly actually, there are currently 12,740 players in this world, which is actually below Global Conflict 2, but we will get into that, the exact numbers of that when I switch over to do that report. So the big news, I believe, this week is going to be that the Anthrax Raise group went ahead and dropped out of House 15 and joined House 5, which of course is part of House 19. Apparently they don't like House 9 a whole lot and decided to go ahead and attack them. So if anybody remembers correctly, Anthrax Raise group, they were in and out of a few houses. I believe they ended up going into House 10, fought against House 15 during that war. So it's rather interesting that all of a sudden now they're pro House 19. But, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles. And as it turns out now, House 19 actually has flipped Canada over to their house colors. So it's now House 19. And I think this says a lot about any possible resistance against House 19. That is really why we're seeing this exodus of players. They're not interested really in continuing. The world is going to be ruled by House 19 for this next age, I believe. So for the remainder of Age 1. And I don't really see anything changing about that at the current rate, you know, because it requires more players to come back into the game. And if too many of the people who opposed House 19's rule actually are chased out of the game, this world, they're probably not going to come back in force again. So I am a little worried, I guess you could say, about the long-term prospects of Global Conflict 1. Aside from that, things have been going along pretty much as always. House 2 has lost additional territory in Central Europe, in Western Europe. House 15 has continued its campaign quite successfully against House 1 and have pretty much taken over the majority of the Middle East now. House 1 has pretty much been reduced to one little county. Well, one country, I should say. They're so small these days, they look like counties. You know, I was somebody who was used to the concept of a house needing to actually work together to take countries. But, you know, these days, you can just have one player jump inside a country and take it over. You know, the king's seat used to mean something special. And that was sort of eroded. It was a continual process of erosion through the EU. I can't say those letters together. The EU world and, of course, Global Conflict when they opened up. Aside from that, really not a whole lot been going on in Global Conflict 1. So here we are now in Global Conflict 2. It is currently day 25. And if we take a look at the leaderboard, there are currently 13,297 players active in this world. So about 500 more players in Global Conflict 2 than there are in Global Conflict 1. Unfortunately, this number is actually down in Global Conflict 2. If I'm taking a look at the numbers from last week here, and I can see for Global Conflict 2 last week, we had 14,693 players. So we have lost over 1,000 players in the span of 1 week on Global Conflict 2. However, that is to be expected, I suppose, because a lot of the players that probably joined and really didn't rank very far. They have been deleted from the system, obviously, as the game iterates through that list and progressively checks and removes the inactive players that meet the requirements. So what has been going on in Global Conflict 2? House 1 has been doing quite well, and House 12 actually got in contact with me, or they let me know that their sole mission in this world is to apparently fight with House 1, and they won't be making peace with them. So it seems perhaps that some grudges from other worlds were transferred over into Global Conflict 2, potentially Global Conflict 1 grudges. So House 1 is a coalition of houses that include House 19 and House 13 at the very least. There is also the potential of House 3 being a part of that alliance. So at the moment, the big alliances are, of course, House 1, as I mentioned, House 10, House 12, and House 18, and to a lesser extent, I suppose, House 9. And in regards to House 9, you may recall from last week, they were fighting House 2. And something interesting happened here with House 2, according to the account of House 9, and that is some other players dropped out of House 2 and joined House 1. So there might be some pro House 1 sentiments in House 2, and if they're pressured too much, they might entirely fold over to that house. But I'm not sure. I don't think House 9 currently at the moment has any problem or any issues with House 1. So they're sort of being squeezed from both sides. You have big alliances here on the west side, and then you have the House 1 super alliance on the east side. Because let's face it, House 12, what they hold here in Russia currently is not all that secure. It's a very big country, and so the looks are misleading. But I'm a little bit worried about the future of House 9 and that alliance. They have had their difficulties in the past with other houses. House 18, however, looks to be doing pretty well on its own. I don't think it's really fighting anybody at the moment, and neither is the House 10, House 11, and House 8 alliance. So it depends upon where this world goes. I haven't been able to delve much deeper into the various politics of it because, well, to be quite frank, I'm not the sort of person that is all that outgoing, and for me it is a difficulty to sort of browbeat information out of houses. Houses naturally don't want to give up very much. They don't want to give away many details about their future plans, of course. So, you really have to be persuasive and sometimes manipulative, and that's just not me. I'm pretty much somebody who wants to, I'm a do-it-yourself sort of person, and this is something that largely requires a lot of other houses to give input into to help form my overall opinion of the world, because otherwise I don't really know what's going on. You can look at the map, you can analyze it, and take a look at the various counties and provinces, countries that have changed over the past week, but even that is quite tedious, and you really don't know on the ground what is actually going on unless you hear from these houses individually. What did you expect when I attempted to cover multiple worlds? This is something, and this is going to be a slight tangent to go off on, because I really don't have anything else to say about this world, but this was one of my fears about covering two worlds, is that the amount of politics I would have to memorize would simply be too great for me to just be able to reiterate it sort of off the top of my head and be quite spontaneous in doing so. So I was worried about that from the get-go, but then I dropped some information from my Global Conflict 1 report and sort of condensed it into just a generic Global Conflict report. And so far it has been going well, I think, but I do need more contacts in game. So if anybody is aware of somebody who would be willing to help with this report, because the thing is, I could go ahead and mass mail everybody, but there has to be a more efficient way to do that. And I have established contacts in the first world that I consider to be trustworthy and reliable, and those are the people, those opinions are ones I value, are the ones that I go to for each house to get information on what happened in the past week. And when you introduce a new world, a lot of the top players are not players that were top players in the other, in Global Conflict 1. And there are a few, and for the large part, they've been helpful. I'm not complaining about it. Any help that is willingly offered is always appreciated, but to establish such diplomatic relationships with smaller houses especially is something that is often time-consuming, and sometimes there's actually a language barrier to sort of prevent that. So yeah, if, as always, you have or know anybody who you think would be able to help increase the accuracy of this report, I do encourage you to encourage them, or even yourself, to get in contact with me in game and let me know. And feel free to spam mail, long lines of mails at me. I try not to disclose any deeply personal details of any of those mails. I think my past history would sort of document that I'm not one to do that, but I find it easier to go through the mails and sort of follow along in a chronological timeline to piece together what is going on, rather than somebody to sort of interpret it in their eyes. The exchanges are oftentimes more unbiased, I think, than what one side or the other side actually came away with from that exchange. You really don't have much more to say about the world, aside from what I believe was the disclosure that House 12 is committed to fighting House 1 in this world, and the fact that I think House 9 actually made peace with House 2. There just hasn't been a whole lot going on, to my knowledge anyway. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.